Hey everyone, we're back with Bloom V2, the latest iteration of our fractal sequencer. In our previous video, I offered a brief overview of Bloom V2's functionality and how it compares to the original Bloom. In this video, we'll be running through the module function by function. It's effectively a video manual. It might get a little dry at times. I apologize. I'll do my best to spice it up as much as I can. If you have any additional questions about Bloom that are not covered in this video, feel free to leave a comment below or hop over to our Discord channel where me, Andrew, and other Bloom users are hanging out and chatting modular. Okay, let's plant a new sequence. First things first, we will want to patch Bloom to a sound source that we'd like to sequence. For that, we'll focus on two outputs, note and gate. Bloom is a 3-channel sequencer, and you can select which channel you're focused on by pressing the channel button here. Also, you'll probably hear me reference things as focused throughout the video. That just means the currently selected channel. We're just going to focus on channel 1 right now. Note 1 will output the melodic CV data from Bloom and tracks 1 volt per octave. And gate 1 will output the gate state and length as a 5 volt signal. Depending on your sound source, you might patch these two outputs to different spots in your system. If you're patching a complete synth voice like Surface, you can patch both outputs to a single module. Patch the Note 1 output to the volt per oct input, then patch the Gate 1 output to the trig input. If you're looking to sequence a synth voice constructed of multiple modules, then you'll need to know where you want your gate signal and volt per oct signal to both go. For example, I patched up a subtractive synth voice in the corner here with chord, prism, and cascade. I'm going to patch my Gate 1 out to my cascade trig input, which will trigger my filter envelope, and then I will patch my Note 1 out to chords volt per oct input. I'm going to use this patch for a little bit before I switch it up. Now that we're patched up, let's get our sequence running. I'm going to turn up the mic knob and we'll hear our sequence play. Turning the rate knob to the right will increase the sequence rate, while turning it to the left will decrease the rate. If you don't want to use the internal clock on Bloom, you can patch an external clock using the clock input here, and then turn the rate knob all the way down. Bloom will start using the external clock to run everything. Also, we can adjust the pulse per quarter note, or PPQN, of the clock input and clock output using Narwhal. I can set the PPQN for either the input or the output to be 1, 4, 8, or 24. Bloom's internal clock signal is always running at 24 PPQN. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the internal clock. Currently, the sequence is running through 8 steps, which we can see here on the trunk LEDs. We can also see the clock rate here and our channel gate signal here. And so far, we aren't hearing anything melodic. We can change the notes of our sequence using these 8 encoders in the middle of the module. Each encoder edits a single step within the 8 focus steps of the sequence, and they run sequentially left to right from the top row to the bottom row. Let's turn some encoders and get a melody going. Each channel on Bloom is able to sequence up to 64 steps, and I'll show you how to edit those steps in a little bit. It's also good to know that Bloom's notes can adjust within a 5-octave range, allowing for large frequency jumps with precision volt per oct tracking. Now that we have our melody playing, we can activate and deactivate steps by clicking the encoders down. You'll see the trunk LEDs turn off for deactivated steps. On deactivated steps, the melodic CV will not update, and the gate output will remain low to not trigger our voice. Okay, we are sequencing. There are a couple more controls I'd like to look at while we're here. The root knob in the top right corner diatonically transposes the sequence. This means that the notes, when transposing, will always stay in key with one another. We also have a reset button here, which will reset all of Bloom's channels to the first step on button release. Our sequence is running, It's melodic. It's boring? You know what that means. It's spice time. Let's change up what parts of our steps the encoders can edit. The Tune Mode button is what we need. This button will cycle through the 5 available per step editors on Bloom. Currently, we are on the note pitch editor, which is indicated by the blue LED. As I press the button, both the button LED and the tree LEDs will turn green, and a brief LED animation will play to help us understand which mode we are in. The green mode adjusts the gate length. So now, when I turn an encoder, it will change the length of the gate signal for that step. The range is from 5% length at the lowest to 100% at the highest, which ties the step to the next. I told you I'd spice it up, but let's check out what the other tune modes offer. Pressing the button again will take us to the Slew tune mode, indicated by these gold LEDs. Each encoder will now adjust the slew amount on the step. Turning an encoder to the right will increase the amount of slew on the step up to 100% the step length, while turning to the left will decrease the amount of slew. Slew is off when all trunk LEDs are off for a given step. Okay, next up on our tune mode tour is the Ratchets tune mode, which is shown by the purple LEDs. No, these are not repeats like the original Bloom. They are real, bona fide Ratchets. We did it. Turning an encoder will select the amount of gate ratchets within the step, with a single gate signal on the far left, then 2 ratchets, 3, 4, 6, 8, 16, and finally 32. It's awesome. There are a couple of ratchet-related options in Narwhal that are good to know. Triplet options can be removed from the generative ratchets available on Bloom, and the ratchet pulse width can be configured. Ratchets run at a 50% duty cycle by default, but Narwhal can set the ratchet width to match the gate length value of the step instead. This can be used to inject super tiny, clicky ratchets, or increase the gate lengths to add legato to ornaments. What the heck are ornaments, Michael? Don't worry, we will learn about those later, and they are also awesome. We have one more tune mode to check out, and it doesn't affect either of the 2 outputs we patched up. The mod tune mode lets us sequence the CV modulation that outputs from here, the mod output. That's right, Bloom v2 has a 3rd output for each channel. The mod output channel is a sequenceable CV modulation signal that is programmed per step, alongside the rest of the sequence. There are 4 possible modes for each mod output. Let's talk about the first one. Shapes is the default mod output. It is a LFO sequence builder, allowing Bloom to output different LFO shapes per step. Turning an encoder will select between one of 8 basic shapes you can see here. Let's give them a listen. If I keep turning the encoder past the 8 steps, Bloom will offer subdivided and ratcheted variants of each shape. Each new page toggles between a one-shot of the subdivided shape and ratcheting the shape based on the subdivision. For example, on the next page, the shape we select is 2 times faster, but only plays once on the step. On the next page, the shape is still 2 times faster, but will ratchet along the step length. The next set of pages is at 3 times, then 4 times, and then we have an 8 times ratcheting page. Beyond this page gets a bit tricky, but just stay with me as these pages can be really useful for fine-tuning the shape's output. These next pages stretch out the sections of each shape across a step, and when chained with other steps can stretch an LFO shape across multiple steps. Right now, we're setting the step to the first half of our shape. The next page, as you might presume, offers the second half of the shape. I'm going to set it on the second step, and we will hear our shape across 2 steps. The following pages break the shapes up into quarters, allowing us to build a shape across 4 notes. The last 2 pages in the Shapes mod mode set a fixed voltage amount, with each turn of the encoder increasing the fixed voltage from 0 to 5 volts. The Shapes mod mode is a lot to take in, but using it to its full potential can really transform a patch. We have a table in the manual that covers each page of shapes and what they offer. There are also a couple ways to get quick results from shapes, like using this Reseed button. Don't worry, we'll talk about Reseed soon. I just have a couple more mod modes I'd like to run through. To try out other mod modes on Bloom, I'm going to hold the Shift button in the bottom left corner and press the Knob Mode button. The next available mode is Velocity. This is similar to the last 2 pages of Shapes mode, but allows for greater fine-tuning of the voltage amount. Turning the encoder to the left will increase the fixed voltage amount up to 5 volts, while turning the encoder to the right will decrease the voltage down to 0 volts. The third mode is Smooth. Just like the previous mode, the encoder set a voltage value for the step. Instead of being fixed, the voltage will slew from one value to the next, creating a softer CV modulation. The fourth mode offered is Envelope, which is a simple attack-decay style CV shape per step. This can be really useful if you're patching a synth voice but don't have an extra envelope to spare. Turning the encoder will move through the envelope transformation from a quick, plucky shape on the left to a triangle shape in the middle, and flipping the shape moving past that. Let's give it a listen. And those are the 5 tune modes available for the step encoders. You might be thinking, those modes are awesome, but I don't always want to have to sit here and edit every single step of my huge 64-step sequence. I get it. I don't really want to either. That's why we added the Reseed button. Pressing this button dice rolls all 5 tune modes for a focus sequence, like this. You know what? I'm going to move my patch cables around here to change up the sound. There we go. Reseed is a great way to get something fun going fast, but it's also useful for making tweaks to a sequence that's already been programmed. For example, we can reseed individual tune modes if we want to edit a single aspect of our sequence. Just select the tune mode you want to reseed, then hold the tune mode button down while pressing the Reseed button. Bloom will dice roll only that tune mode for the whole sequence. This is perfect if you have a great melody, but want to try out different ratcheting variants across the sequence, or if you want to find a fun Shapes mod sequence without having to go through all the different variations. You can even reseed the tune mode for a single page of the sequence, if there's a block of the sequence that just isn't feeling right. Both the Shift and Tune mode buttons down, then press Reseed to only affect the focused page. We'll talk about lengthening our sequence next, and how the page button plays into this. Before that though, I want to mention a couple of ways we can tweak Reseed with Narwhal. Narwhal has a Reseed filter, which lets us choose which tune modes are dice rolled when reseeded. We can also choose the channel target for the Reseed gate input, which can be the focus channel, any of the channels individually, or globally affect all channels. And there is also a Reseed gate behavior which toggles between reseeding tune modes versus reseeding the branches. Okay, So we've learned how to dice roll and fine-tune our sequence on a per-step basis. Now, let's take a look at some of the settings on Bloom that affect the sequence from a macro perspective. You'll notice that each step encoder has text above or below it in parentheses. This indicates the macro setting that each encoder controls when holding the Shift button, just like on the original Bloom. Let's start with the first setting, length. Holding the Shift button and turning the length encoder will adjust the trunk sequence length, anywhere from 1 step up to 64 steps. I'm going to set my sequence to 16 steps for now. You'll notice now that my sequence goes beyond the 8 steps, the LEDs do not move to the next 8 steps of my sequence, like on the original Bloom. This is where our page button comes in. I'll press the page button to advance the step encoders to the next set of 8 steps in the sequence. Now we can see steps 9 through 16 and edit them with the encoders. By default, the page button will only cycle through active pages, meaning only the amount of pages being used by length. You can use Narwhal to set the page button to cycle through all 8 pages of the steps, regardless of length if that's your preference. Also, there was an issue where the settings for this option were flipped. It's been fixed in a firmware update. You can find the firmware update file on our site and just place it on the USB drive, then reboot Bloom. Okay, let's take a look at our next setting, scale. Turning this encoder will set the note quantization for the sequence. There are 8 available scales on Bloom: chromatic, major, minor, major pentatonic, minor pentatonic, harmonic minor, whole tone, and unquantized. And just so you know, the unquantized setting adjusts the note pitch by 25 cents each encoder increment. Bloom can also change the playback order of the sequence. Turning the order encoder will select a different playback option for the focus channel. The default is forward, but we can also have the sequence play in reverse. Or even pendulum, where the sequence plays forward, then reverse. There's also a random shuffle option, where Bloom can pick a random note in the sequence to play until all notes have been picked, then reset the pick count. These will all seem familiar to Bloom v1 users, but we've added a few more playback options with Bloom v2. Next up is Converge. This playback mode will start at the outermost points of the sequence and then pinball its way to the center, jumping back and forth from the left and right sides of the sequence. There's also a Diverge option, which does the same thing, but starts at the center of the sequence and works its way outward. And just like the forward-reverse pendulum, there's also a Converge-Diverge pendulum. The last playback order is called Page Jump, and it's a bit different than the other options here. Page Jump will randomly jump to the start of any of the 8 sequence pages. This is a fun playback mode when setting up different 8-step motifs around the sequence that Bloom can randomly shuffle up. Okay, on to the next setting. If you ever want to save a sequence to recall at a later time, the next encoder is for you. The pattern encoder lets Bloom save and recall up to 16 different sequences. To save a sequence, Turn the pattern encoder to select between the different slots, indicated by 2 pages of trunk LEDs. Now, while still holding Shift down, hold the pattern encoder down for a couple seconds. A brief LED animation will play indicating that the sequence saved to the chosen pattern slot. To load a pattern, I'll navigate to a pattern slot the same way as before, but instead of holding the encoder down, I will simply click it to load the pattern into my focus channel. Pattern data holds everything about a sequence, including its branches, and it loads immediately. Also, fun fact, you can trigger pattern loads via MIDI through the USB port. Now, down in the roots, we have ratio, which sets the clock multiplier or divider for the focus sequence. Turning the ratio encoder will select one of 9 clock ratios, with ×1 being the default. A sequence can run from the lowest of 8 beats per clock pulse to 4 to 3 and to 2. Then above ×1, we have 2 times the clock rate, then 3, then 4, and finally 8 times the clock rate. Up until now, our macro sequence editors are more or less shared with the original Bloom. These next 3 editors are new to Bloom v2. The Resize encoder will take a sequence and dynamically grow or prune it relative to its original length and note data. This means we can take an 8-step sequence, for example, and stretch it across all 64 steps, or average out a longer sequence into a bite-sized variation on the theme. You'll notice that the sequence is feeling slower when we stretch it out, and that is because the steps in between are off by default. There are a couple resize algorithm options available in Narwhal that can change this. Right now, the sequence is spreading, but we can also have the sequence stretch, where it will repeat the original steps as it expands the sequence. Or we can clone the sequence, where it will reiterate the sequence with each expansion. These modes mainly affect how the sequences can grow, while pruning the sequence more or less behaves the same. The rotate encoder will do exactly what its name states. It will rotate the sequence and move the start point accordingly. Turning the encoder to the right will move the start point forward in the sequence, while turning it to the left will move it backward in the sequence. Simple as that. The last macro sequence editor is Transpose. Turning the encoder to the right will transpose the sequence up diatonically, while turning the encoder to the left will transpose the sequence down. You'll notice that the LEDs are green when we transpose above the current position and red when we are below the current position. One thing to note is that the notes will clamp at the minimum and maximum voltage range. This might seem similar to the root knob, which also transposes the sequence. The key difference between root and transpose, like the last 2 editors we looked at, is that transpose is a destructive edit. That means the note data is mutated when the feature is used. They aren't completely destructive per se, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And those are the 8 macro sequence editor controls. Now, let's take a look at some other controls that are familiar to the original Bloomers. And yeah, there's some new stuff with these controls too. Bloom is a fractal sequencer, which means that it reiterates the sequence we make on its own accord, while maintaining familiarity. The branch knob gives us access to those fractal iterations. Turning the knob selects up to 7 branches to play after the trunk sequence. That means that a 64-step sequence can turn into a 512-step sequence with a single knob turn. Also, if you aren't liking the branches that are generated by Bloom, you can reseed them. Just hold the Shift button and press the Reseed button to reseed only the branches. Next up, we have Path. Bloom generates more than just the 7 available branches when turning the branch knob. It actually generates 254 branches, which can make a max sequence length of 16,320 steps. Yeah, that's a lot of steps. And Path is how we access all those steps. Turning the Path knob will change the pathway Bloom will take through these branches. And the more branches that are available, the more pathways open up for Bloom. The last knob you may remember from Bloom v1 is Mutate, which has a slight twist on Bloom v2. The first half of the knob controls the percentage a note pitch change will happen on the active step, just like the original Bloom. One thing to point out here is that Bloom v2 does a much better job at reining in the notes that get away from the original sequence, maybe get a bit too high in frequency. You may remember those. Yeah, we do too. It doesn't happen anymore. Anyways, after the halfway point, Mutate will also randomly change the gate state and length for the active step, along with random note pitch changes. Much like our Tune Mode button, we have another button on the left side of Bloom that will repurpose these 3 knobs for us and give us new controls over our sequence. I'm going to press the Knob Mode button to jump into Micro Mutate mode. Now, Branch, Path, and Mutate will mutate different tune modes for us. Turning the Branch knob in Micro Mutate mode will adjust the probability of editing the ratchet amount for the active step. The Path knob in Micro Mutate mode will adjust the probability of editing the slew amount for the active step. And lastly, the Mutate knob will adjust the probability of editing the mod output value for the active step. There is a third knob mode we can use, and it is called Performance. Unlike Micro Mutate, which applies destructive changes to the sequence, Performance applies non-destructive sequence effects, meaning I can turn up my random ratchets on branch, then turn them back down to remove them entirely. Paths does the same thing for Slew. The Mutate knob is where we deviate from the previous mode. The first half of the Mutate knob actually behaves similar to the default Mutate knob. Bloom will randomly change the note pitch for the active step. Non-destructively, of course, you can hear when I turn it back down, we're back to our original sequence. The second half of the Mutate knob will add Ornamentation to the sequence. These are musical embellishments that add a bit of flair to our patch. The first portion of the ornamentations will only add simple 2-step embellishments. These can be rhythmic changes like anticipations, suspensions, or syncopations, and they can be melodic changes like fifth or octave jumps and half turns. As we increase the knob, we'll begin to introduce more complex ornamentations. These can be trills, turns, mordants, arpeggios, and others. There's a lot of possibilities with these 3 knobs and their modes, and we have some configurability with Narwhal for assigning the CV inputs. The CV inputs affect whichever channel is focused, and knob mode is active by default, but using Narwhal we can choose which channel and knob mode each CV input controls. For example, I can send CV to my Performance Mutate to introduce ornamentation variations, while keeping my knobs on the default knob mode to introduce branches and paths. Between fractal algorithms, sequence effects, macro editors, and tune modes, we've learned that Bloom can grow our sequence in all sorts of directions. But sometimes it's not the direction we want. Luckily, Bloom has the ability to undo any mutations made to the sequence with Reset. As I hold Shift and press Reset, we will hear all of the mutations applied to our sequence disappear. To understand this feature completely, Bloom is jumping back to the last time I made a manual edit to the trunk sequence by turning a step encoder. And if I perform the same button combo, but hold it for a couple seconds, Bloom will set all tune modes to their default state. We can take it even a step further and perform a complete factory reset for all channels. Hold the Reset and Reseed button at the same time for 3 seconds, and all 3 channels on Bloom will return to their default state. Okay, let's talk about MIDI. Bloom has a TRS MIDI output, which sends out all the sequence data for the 3 channels on Bloom. I'm using my Prophet Rev 2 set up with Bloom. The Prophet has a cool multiple mode where it splits the voices between 2 MIDI channels, letting me sequence with channel 1 and 2 on Bloom. Bloom's MIDI notes are 0 to 60 by default, which might be lower than the range you want to control your device with. We can add a MIDI note offset in Narwhal to move our sequence range. The setting defaults to 48, but you can adjust it anywhere within the CC range. Each channel on Bloom outputs its note data on its numerically matching MIDI channel by default, but you can change which MIDI channel the data is sent to with Narwhal. In addition to the note data, we can also assign where our mod and slew data output with Narwhal. I'm going to control the Prophet's filter cutoff with mod. Narwhal also gives us the ability to output a 24 ppqn MIDI clock signal as well, which is great for clock syncing devices to Bloom. Bloom not only outputs MIDI, but it can accept MIDI through the USB port as a MIDI host. Using MIDI, we can break out the different knob modes, set up individual buttons for all the Reseed variants, trigger patterns from our pattern bank on the fly, or even transpose the root knob with a chromatic key bed. The full list of available controls can be found in the manual. You may be thinking, I really like this sequence I have, but I don't have room in my pattern bank. Will it be saved? The answer is yes. Bloom automatically saves the channel sequences to the USB drive, just like the patterns. You will know the sequences are being saved when the clock LED is gold. Maybe you've noticed it change throughout this video. Try not to pull the USB drive out of the port when this is happening. If you aren't a fan of autosaving, you can set Bloom to manually save the channels in Narwhal. To manually save the focus channel sequence, I'm going to hold Shift and the page button for a few seconds. The clock LED will turn gold to show us that the sequence is saving to the USB drive. We can also save all 3 channels at the same time by holding Shift, Channel, and Page at the same time. We can load sequences into Bloom the same way. Instead of holding down all the buttons for a period of time, I will just tap the Page button to load my sequences into Bloom. I like to use this to save certain points of return in my sequence experimentation, allowing me to recall the sequence after editing and mutating it into something new. Editing a 64-step sequence can be a bit daunting, but taking it down to bite-sized pieces can make it more manageable. We've added a tuning reference mode just for that. There are 3 tuning reference modes, and the default mode plays the sequence in its entirety. If I hold Shift and press the Tune Mode button, Bloom will now only play the 8 steps of my focused page. Now I can navigate and edit subsections of my sequence by pressing the Page button. If I hold Shift and press the Tune Mode button again, Bloom will only play a single note at a time. If I turn the encoder for a new note, Bloom will begin playing that note for me to edit. And we can still advance through the sequence with Page. I also want to quickly mention that, like our more recent modules, we can dim the LEDs on Bloom by holding Shift and turning the rate encoder. Bloom V2 has fully blossomed into the sequencer we at Qubit have always wanted. Bloom V2 is shipping worldwide today, and we hope this video helps you as you tend your own modular sound garden. If you're looking to learn more about Bloom V2, head to the site to read the manual and check out audio examples of the new features. We also have a Discord where the Qubit team and I chat with the other community members about Bloom, other Qubit modules, modular synthesis, and music as a whole. We'd love for you to join us if you haven't. Until next time, happy patching!